In this short video, I want to talk about the difference between CMYK color model and the RGB color model, and when you might want to choose them. Illustrator allows you to choose either color model when creating a new document, and you can change your document between them as well. It's not generally a good idea, but if you, for example, if you created a CMYK document, you want to convert it to RGB, you can, and I will show you that as well. I have two documents set up here right now representing my primaries in each color model. On the left, I have cyan, magenta, and yellow for the CMYK. I did not include black for this demonstration. Black is essentially added to this color model to be able to get a pure black when printing. On the right, I have my RGB, red, green, and blue color model, and we can look how they work. In many ways, they're the opposite of each other. CMYK is what's called subtractive color, and it works on a system where we lay down pigment on a surface, and those pigments in effect work like a filter and absorb color and will reflect back other ranges of color. RGB color, on the other hand, is additive color, where we work with light. The more color we add, the closer we get to white. So the more color we add in CMYK, the closer we get to black. The more color we add in RGB, the closer we get to white. So let's look at how this works. I'll move these around. If I start to overlap, you'll see that if I combine cyan and magenta, I will get a blue color. And then when I add yellow to the mix, you can see yellow and cyan are going to give me green, yellow and magenta are going to give me red, and where they all combine, well, in theory would give me black, but that's the pigments are inadequate for generating a pure black, so therefore we need black ink to add to this system. As far as RGB, when we start to add the colors together, you'll see that we actually get lighter colors. So if for example, if I add my red and my green, I will get yellow. When I add blue to the mix, you'll see that blue and red are going to give me magenta, blue and green are going to give me cyan, and where they all combine, we get white. So keep that in mind as you're working, that we get completely different results by combining the primaries. One gets darker, one gets lighter. Now, why would we choose one versus the other? And there's many reasons, but you can break it down into really a simple rule. If you're creating artwork that will be printed, you really want to start with CMYK. There are several reasons for that. Is because one is your artwork will most likely be printed using CMYK inks if it's going on offset press, for example, if you're printing a book. Each color model has what's called a gamut, which is a range of colors, and the RGB gamut is much larger than my CMYK gamut. So therefore, if I set up a document in RGB, I have a good chance of creating colors that won't print the way they do on the screen. So working with CMYK is going to limit me to printable colors. That does not mean that when you print that it's going to look exactly like it does on the screen, because there's other factors like paper, ink, and the fact that when you're looking at the screen, you're looking actually at a light source. But if you create a document in RGB, you can easily choose colors that will not be converted the same way in CMYK. And we can see that example right here. Greens are notoriously bad for shifting when converting from RGB to CMYK. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this document, which is currently RGB. You can tell that by looking in the tab at the top, and you can see this is CMYK. I'm going to change this document under my File menu to Document Color Mode. I'm going to change it to CMYK. And look what happens to my colors. They all shift greatly to coming to the colors that as they would print. And so if you had a really bright green in your illustration and then convert it to CMYK, it's going to shift a lot. And you'll most likely be disappointed with the printing results. With CMYK color mode, I can't actually generate a green that is that bright. If I go to my color picker and I go to my brightest green, right, I will not get a green that is bright as I had before, because I am limited to this range of colors that are possible by CMYK. I'm going to go back to RGB, and the RGB model, this color is currently RGB. It is showing me CMYK values because that's what I most recently looked at. But this is good because I want to show you that there is a warning here. This is a gamut warning. So if I am working in RGB mode for something that will be printed in CMYK, I can check my color panel and see if that color will work. This bright green will not work. I'm getting a warning. And this is the color that is closest to this color as far as CMYK is concerned. So this is the color that it will be converted to. If I click here, it will convert it to the closest color. My red, again, this is called out of gamut. If I click here, it will bring it into a CMYK red. My blue is out of gamut, and I will bring that into a CMYK color as well. So when we set up a document, we have an opportunity to choose whether or not it's RGB or whether it's CMYK. I'm going to create a new document. And when I do that, I have all these options of sizes. And if I choose from one of these categories up at the top of the bar, for example, if I choose mobile, it's going to give me RGB color, web, RGB color, print. It's going to go to CMYK color, excuse me. Film and video is going to go back to RGB, art and illustration. For some reason, it's RGB, but it very likely might want to be CMYK. So you can choose the color mode here. It'll often be dictated by the profile that you choose at the top in the category. So I'm going to go to print, and you'll see that it's CMYK that is set up. Now, if you don't want those settings, of course, you can change it right here. It'll give you a little warning saying, are you sure you want to do that? Let's assume that you know what you're doing and say yes. So I'm going to close. I'm not going to open it right now. Now, several other things. If I'm creating artwork, then I'm going to export to Photoshop. Even if it's going to be for print, I will tend to work in RGB because Photoshop works more efficiently in RGB and is really designed around RGB color space. If I'm creating something that's only going to be displayed on the web, I will also choose RGB as for my color space. But otherwise, I use CMYK. There's very little color shift, very little, if any, color shift, I should say, if going from CMYK to RGB. So we saw how our colors shifted as we went from, let's go back to our RGB colors. We're in our RGB color space. Let's look at this again. And I will go document color mode, CMYK, and our colors shifted. I'm going to now go to my CMYK document, and I'm going to do the same thing in the opposite way. We're going to shift to RGB. And notice our colors did not shift at all. And one reason for this is when we look at artwork on our screen is displaying the information already in RGB. So it is already showing a translation of CMYK values to RGB. And so there's very little shift. And the RGB gamut contains all the CMYK colors, so therefore we do not choose colors that fall out of the gamut. There's no reason to shift them. Another reason for choosing RGB mode would be if you're creating artwork that's going to be exclusively printed on a inkjet printer. So you might be creating a series of prints, or G-clay prints, or even just other prints that you're going to sell online or at art fair or whatever. You might want to work in RGB for that, or at least convert it to RGB before you print, simply because those desktop or larger format inkjet printers work with RGB data rather than CMYK data. Most of them have far more than 4 ink cartridges, and they have their own color conversion profiles that are based on RGB versus CMYK. So oddly enough, what would happen is if you sent a CMYK file to one of those printers, it actually reads the RGB data that's already on the screen. So might as well work within that color space. I hope this clarifies your understanding of the two primary color modes that we have in Illustrator.